Okay, so we are jumping ship on the more Nevuchim for now. We're going back to the Mishnah Torah with fresher minds. Whatever mind means, we'll find out. So let's read again from Dalet Zion. And I think I had a light bulb go on in my head this morning when I was thinking about the Nefesh Kol Basar thing. So we'll see what happens. All right, Olam, so Zion, or sorry, Dalet Zion. Olam in atara golem b'tzura below golem. So you never see a material without a form or form without material. Rather, it's the mind of man that divides the body that exists in his mind and knows that it is comprised of material and form. And the Lev Ha'adam knows that there exist bodies whose material is comprised of 4 elements. V'gufin shagalman pashut be'eino mechubar migolam acher, and bodies that are that their material is simple, meaning not composite, and they're not comprised of any other body. V'tzurush she'ein lahem golem einan nirin la'ayin, and the forms that are not visible to the eye. Sorry, that don't have material are not visible to the eye. But they're known in the mind's eye. Just like we know the Lord of all without the seeing of the eye. So in the book, in Adler's book on the Intellect, he had a good mashal. I forgot what he used it for, but he said, if you have butter and toast, okay, then those are existentially distinct. Okay, they're different from each other. Now, if you butter the toast, okay, so the butter and the toast are no longer existentially distinct in the sense that they're combined and you can't separate them, but they're analytically distinct, right? Because you could still identify it as there's toast that has been buttered, even though they're inseparable, right? So I think that doesn't answer all of the questions that we said about what is the mode of existence that forms have in their bodies, but I think it's good for when he says that the mind is the thing that extracts the form from the matter, even though when you encounter them in reality, they're buttered toast, like they're together, but the mind extracts it. So analytically, they're distinct. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't answer all the questions. Yeah. Okay. So that's the premise, which now is going to set us up for this, and this is really what I wanted to focus on today. I want to crack this. Okay. Nefesh kol basar. End of sentence. The soul of all flesh, is the form with which it was endowed by God. So that's animals and humans. I'm pretty sure not plants. Okay. So yeah. So that means, again, when you have an animal like again, this is we have to think in Aristotelian categories, thinking that species are real things. But like you have let's say a particular species of dog, a golden retriever or whatever, and so all of the golden retrievers are different in reality in terms of their individuals, but they partake of a common form. That's why we call them golden retrievers. All right, so that's the form of golden retriever is the soul of golden retriever. Yeah. And I think it's even more than that. It's the soul of this golden retriever, meaning there is such a thing as the form per se, but when you point to a particular dog and you say that it's you say what is your soul, right? Then it's this dog's form of golden retriever that it partakes of,
which is totally different than any other.
Well, that's the question. I mean, it's there's some relationship. The material that makes up this dog is informed by that form, right? But the form but in abstract, that form it shares in common. There's only one form of golden retriever. Yeah. Like the example of this, I mean, easier example, even though we're not talking about a basar anymore, but let's say like triangles. There's another one example that Adler's fond of is there's all the triangles you encounter in real life are particular triangles, but they all partake of the form of triangularity. So triangularity is instantiated in each of the not inaugurally instantiated, it's instantiated in all the particular triangles.
Right.
And so they all share that, but you can still speak of this triangle's triangularity or that triangle's triangularity. And the thing you're talking about is being exhibited or manifest in this particular, but there is only one concept of triangularity. There's no multiple triangularities.
Right.
Yeah.
And they all have their own triangularity in them or whatever, which are all the triangularities are similar.
Yes, they're all identical even. Yeah.
Oh, they're all identical.
Or there's meaning there is only one triangularity, and all of the particular triangles partake of that triangularity.
Right.
In their particularness. In their particularity,
and they're different from each other, just
in particulars, in material particulars, right? Is that this one's bigger, this one's smaller, this one's yellow, this one's blue, this one was created first, this one's created second, this one's in this location, that one's in that location.
Is that when you say that, are you talking about the triangles or the triangle?
The triangles.
The triangles.
The triangularity is there's only one triangularity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the instances of triangles have, I'd say they have particular instances of that triangularity. Right.
Yes, yeah. And to I guess if you're talking strictly speaking, perfect triangles, then they all have perfect triangularity in the sense of like, it's not lacking in its triangulariness. But when you're talking about messier things, like messily drawn triangles, or when you're talking about physical beings, then they're all partaking of the form in less than perfect ways. Because if again, if you have the what would be a good example of this? I mean, let's take any animal, right? So if you imagine like the perfect golden retriever, if there is such a thing. What?
I said, who's a good boy?
Yeah. Yeah, the good boy. Yeah. Then the perfect one is gonna not be fully instantiated in any given golden retriever. They're gonna all partake of it to a greater or lesser degree, or in some ways and not others. It's not perfectly lined up, so to speak.
And why don't we just say that there's
because that would violate Aristotle.
Good answer.
No, what were you gonna say?
Is there that there's a form of messily drawn triangle also, and then there's just a new form as opposed to a bad
right.
bad representation.
Right. So that question actually becomes a real issue in what we call species, but yeah. So why is that not a thing, right? That's a good question. Meaning, why isn't there such thing as everything has its own form, and therefore you almost dissolve the concept of form. I mean, it's a good question.
Well, if you have two messily drawn triangles, then
yeah,
they would.
Yeah, I mean,
you can still have an idea of form.
Right. I mean, this is what I'm about to say is not an answer,
okay.
But the fact that what he said is that the mind is what is machalik the guf hanimsa badato v'yodeshu mechubar migolim b'tzura, and the fact that that we have, for example, the fact that a triangle and a circle are different things, and our mind sees that. And our mind can look at a bunch of messy triangles and a bunch of circles, messy circles, and yet we still distinguish between the circles and the triangles. Means that there is some concept that is that some form that our mind is recognizing. Now, here's the thing: at that level, and this gets into Adler's thing. Well, I made an offer, which you two weren't here for, is that if we miraculously finish this today, then one option for Wednesday is I reread Adler's chapter where he goes through his argument for why the intellect of man is qualitatively differentiated from that of animals. And he has an interesting question. Here's a teaser here, is that he says there's two different types of qualitative difference. There's superficial and radical. A superficial qualitative difference is one where the two things have different properties. Right, like we said before, there's the difference between a triangle and a square is that it has or let's say between a triangle and a circle is that triangles have a property that circles don't have, which is angles. So it's not just a matter of degree, It's like size, like two different triangles that are two different sizes. It's just a difference in degree, whereas triangle and circle are different in kind because that's a different property. But then Adler says, when you're talking about two things that are different in kind, there's a superficial difference and a radical difference. So superficial difference is where it has a different property, but that property is only the result of an underlying quantitative difference. So for example, the difference between water and ice. So it is a difference in kind because ice is solid and has different properties than water, but it's only a superficial difference in quality because it just stems from underlying factors in terms of like the temperature and the how that affects the motion of the particles. So his question that he's trying to set out is to argue that, can we argue that the intellect of man is not only different in kind, which we kind of talked about before, but that difference in kind is radical, not superficial, meaning it's the result of something that is an absolute difference, not just difference in quantity. So that's something we could do. We don't have to do it on Wednesday, but that's something that's interesting to do. So one of the arguments he makes, so he says the thing I just said about triangles and circles. He didn't say this about me, but the thing I just said about triangles and circles. You could say though that's just we're just associating that perceptually, that the triangles kind of look similar, But then he says if you look at languages and words, the fact that you could draw different letters A in different fonts and the mind will recognize it, and you could train an animal to recognize it. But if you say, for example, that there's a word in one language that is the same word as in another, and they look different and they sound different, and yet the mind sees a commonality to the point where you can have actual transference of language and concepts, that's a different kind of thing. Now, he has to go on to argue that is indicative of a radically qualitative different mind, but that's like more than just a perceptual difference. Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyway, the soul of all flesh is the form that God endowed it with. Now, this is the line that I had the insight about, I think. The additional knowledge, or the additional, I think it's knowledge here, the additional knowledge, I think it's knowledge. I don't think it's mind. The additional knowledge that is found in the soul of man is the form of the man who is perfected in his knowledge. So that gave us trouble last time. Maybe it gave us trouble in different ways. It gave me trouble because why does he have to say it is the form of the man who is perfected in his mind? Mm-hmm. But then I realized that that's what all forms are. All forms are the perfected form of the thing. Mm-hmm. So for example, if go back to our friend, the building, the form of the building is the design, which is perfect. So it's not, you wouldn't say that, and even if the material building is not perfectly embodying it, it is, the form itself is perfect. So you wouldn't say that the form of the building is an imperfect building. Mm-hmm. So the form of man, so you have two things. You have man's animal body, which has its animal form, okay, which is, I guess we'll call that like, I don't know, like humanoid, I don't know what you want to call it, the thing that is just like the whatever man was before the time of Elohim, and that's no different than the golden retriever. But then the form of that is the knowledge of the perfect man, that this particular man embodies to a greater or lesser extent. And the more knowledge he gains, the more he's approximating that form, and the more his soul is being actualized, so to speak.
That's cool.
Yeah. And this is a machlokus. I think that I feel like maybe we talked about this. Did we talk earlier in the year, maybe in Koheles, about the Sefer HaIkarim interpretation of the machlokus, about whether it's better to have been created or not? Or am I imagining this? That it had to do with the difference between the Mekubalim and the philosophers, and Rambam being on the side of the philosophers and like other people being on the side of the Mekubalim.
I feel like Pesach gave something on this.
Yeah.
At some point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Because so I don't know to what extent that has to do with this, but he says that the way that the Sefer, I don't want to go through it inside right now, but the way that the Sefer HaIkarim puts it, so this is machlokus in the Gemara, is it better to have been created or not, and so he's trying to explain what that is in philosophical terms. So he says it's machlokus whether the soul is an etzem ruchani or a koach hiulani. Mm-hmm. So etzem ruchani is, for lack of a term, like a spiritual essence or spiritual substance, and a kol chilani is a material potentiality, And so he says that if the soul is a spiritual essence, then the way that it's conceived of is you are a physical body and then you're endowed with a soul that's like from Shemaim or whatever. And then when you die, then it goes back. And he says that's the basis that is underlying the Shita of Gilgul. He doesn't say whether he holds by Gilgul or not, but then he says, according to the philosophers, you start off with nothing and you actualize your soul through gaining knowledge. So there's no notion, there can't be any notion of a soul existing before you were born. That just doesn't make any sense. That would be like talking, the analogy I use, and I don't know if this is a good analogy, but like you have, let's say, for example, sheet music on a page, and then the musician performs the song. So you cannot speak, it's irrational to talk about the notion of a performance before it happened. Performance is the actualization of the music on the page. You talk you say that you're going to perform, but you can't speak of the performance as a thing. So too the soul is the actualization of knowledge in a particular human. So that's a one-time thing. It didn't have, there's no existence of the soul beforehand, just a potentiality. And then you actualize it, and then that's it. You can't go back. You can't put the soul back into the body. There's no Gilgul, or you can't put it into a new body, I should say. You can put it into an old body if you restore it. That's the Mason, which everyone holds by, So that, I don't know if the Sefer HaIkarim's definition of soul when he's voicing the philosopher's view is the same as the Rambam's, but it certainly is reminiscent of it, is that your soul is the extent to which the form of the man perfect in his knowledge is actualized in you. So just like the golden retriever's soul is the extent to which it embodies the form of the perfect golden retriever, the really good boy, so too the soul of you, your soul, is that which is actualized in you of the man who's perfect in his knowledge.
Is that what the active intellect is?
I got even more confused. I actually stopped reading and threw the book down. No, I didn't physically throw it down, but in Menachem Kellner's book, Torah in the Observatory, Gersonides, Maimonides, and Song of Songs, which for some reason is $100 on Amazon now. So I guess I should hold on to it. Yeah, he has a chapter in there about the difference between the Rabag and the Rambam in terms of their views of the active intellect, or it's really mostly about the Rabag. And he went into so many different definitions or explanations of the active intellect of the different scholars of Aristotle, like students of Aristotle, that I just lost the ability to follow and lost the interest. And the fact that the Rambam doesn't bring that down here means that I feel okay, like totally ignoring it.
If you need another safer to learn,
then So regardless of, the place where the active intellect would be, now that we've invited him in, is or her, no, is in how man gains knowledge and how the world has forms. But if you just accept the fact that I don't know how that happens, then this would still be a working model of the soul. Yeah. Side note here. Okay, so this came up earlier on in I think I proposed this as a topic maybe to talk about, but we never ended up doing it, is Tinuk Shenishba, right? A kid who was raised believing he was not Jewish, or he was raised as a heretic. So like the question is, does such a person have a chelek in olam haba, since it's not their fault, So a lot of people, say that they still have a chelek in olam haba because it's not their fault. Rambam, though, since his whole mechanism of the soul being eternal has to do with the knowledge you get, then it doesn't matter how you arrived at your false knowledge. In terms of olam haba, if your soul doesn't have like the minimal ideas that it needs to gain eternality, which is, the first 4 or 5 ikarim, so then it can't have eternal existence because there's nothing to be eternal there. So I'm only mentioning that now because he's saying here that the definition of soul is the actualized knowledge that you have. So if you didn't actualize the knowledge, so the knowledge that would be sufficient to give your soul existence, then it doesn't go on after death.
Mhm.
And therefore, it doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter if you were indoctrinated or if you like willfully like rebelled against the ideas. He just has no mechanism. Yeah.
That's a separate question. Why, like, why are those things necessary?
Yeah.
Actualizing the soul.
Right. Oh, fun factoid I also learned over Shabbos reading. Nothing to do with this. It's just a shocking fact. Absolutely shocking. Nowhere in the Mishnah Torah does the Rambam mention creation yesh me'ayin.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah. The closest thing he gets to it is when he's talking about the definition of a min. He says if you hold that God is not the rishon and sur lakol or something like that, but that's not explicitly. That's not explicitly like saying that you need to believe in creation yesh me'ayin. In the Karim he does talk about it, but like it's just interesting he doesn't mention it in the Mishnah Torah.
Wow.
Yeah, just never noticed that. Hard to notice what people don't say. Okay, so I think that makes sense why he says shalom b'dato.
Yeah.
Okay. The al-tzura zo nemar b'torah nas adam b'talmi nakid musenu. Now here he's not differentiating between tzelem and demus. That's a whole nother like track that if you look at the Mefarshim on that, some seem to indicate that it is the same. Like, and they point like someone I saw, maybe it was Avram ben Rambam, I don't remember, pointed out that in the next pasuk, the one after this in 27, it only says tzelem. And then in the Toldos Ha'adam, when it goes through genealogy and talks about Shes, it only says demus. So so again, I don't know if it's Amr ben Rambam or someone else says that you see from there that it's each one carries the idea with it. It's not like you need both of them. It's just like a parish to have both of them. Whereas others, let's say like the Sforno says Tselem is really what the Rambam was talking about, but then demus is free will. So that's a different thing. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Kolomar shetihi lo tsura hayoda'as umasegas hadeos she'en lahem golem. So it means that man has a form that knows and apprehends ideas that don't have material ad sheyid melahen, until he resembles them. Now, in Adler's thing, this is the crux of the proof that the argument that the intellect is immaterial is. Have you ever heard like the general Plato? I think it's attributed to Plato, the Platonic explanation for why the intellect is immaterial.
Well, because it could perceive non-material things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like again, the crude, the vulgar man's summary of the proof is if I can, this table's physical, and I can only touch the physical table if I have physicality. So too, if ideas are immaterial, then there must be something in me that is immaterial that can interact with them.
Yeah.
So that's how I don't even know where Plato says it. I was told that in the name of Plato. Adler takes a much more rigorous treatment of that. And so that's what the Rambam is talking about here. Ad sheyid melahen, that your mind is apprehending forms that are separate from matter, and therefore comes to resemble them. The ino omer al tzura zo hanikar. Yeah.
Do you think maybe ad sheyid melahen has to do with the moose?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, that's a good point, because so this is another thing also, is who's God talking to, right? So a lot of Mefarshim say it's God talking to the angels, and some even go so far as to say that Tselem Elohim is really Tselem Elohim, right? That like Sforno says that it's the Tselem of the angels.
Interesting.
And so man is in their likeness, in that the part of him that is man resembles them in the fact that they're surah without golem. Yeah. Okay.
Side thing.
Yeah.
When you talk about angels, you say Elohim, not Elohim.
Yeah. And same thing when you're talking about other false gods.
Yeah,
and same thing when you're talking about judges. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I knew about false judges.
Yeah.
False judges.
Yeah. Right. Like it's Elokeha Elohim, not Elokeha Elohim. That would not make any sense. Yeah. Ve'ino omer al tzura zo hanikeres la'inayim shu ha'pev ha'chod al lastash ushar rosh maguf shazo torshma. So you don't say surah about the that which is recognizable to the eyes, which is the mouth, the nose, the cheeks, and the other impression of the body, because that's called toar. And it's not the nefesh that is found that exists in every living creature. And okay, so again, I'm pretty sure that this nefesh, hametsuya l'chol nefesh chaya, through which it eats and drinks and procreates and feels and thinks or imagines or whatever, that's the same nefesh as the nefesh called basar I think that's the same nefesh. So ela hadea, rather it's the knowledge. She tzuras nefesh, which is the form of the soul. With tzuras nefesh hakas medaber, and it's the form of the soul that the pasuk is speaking about, not the form of the body. Upamim rabos, and that's a good way I just said it right now. Actually, the form of the body man has in common. Man has a form of the body which is the same as the form of animals. That's the one through which he eats, drinks, and procreates and stuff. But the form of the soul is different.
Right.
Yeah. Upa'amim rabos tikar zoha tzura nefesh varuach. And many times this tzura is called nefesh and ruach. Ufikach tzarech lihizar b'shemesh shelo tit'eh choshem shem yilamed minyano. And you need to be careful with these names so that you don't make a mistake, or as the other translations, so you don't cause others to err. And learn out each name from its context, each term from its context.
We might be talking to Ibn Ezra there, but like you're using the words wrong.
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Ibn Ezra after? Yeah.
Ibn Ezra was before him.
Before him.
Yeah. That's funny. Ein suras hanefesh hazos mechuberes min hayesodos kadesh tipar lahen. The Malbim, would definitely disagree with him. The form of the soul. Well, if what the Rambam is saying is true, that's very difficult for the Malbim then.
What the?
If the Malbim holds that the same term means the exact same thing in every case, and the Rambam is saying many times these terms are used interchangeably, that means that the Malbim is going to have to come up with a consistent definition that applies across the board.
Sorry.
Yeah. Like let's say, for example, if nefesh means the tzelem elokim, but then also means ki had dam hu benefesh. What are you going to say about that? There's blood in your tzelem elokim? Clean it up.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. So this the tzura, the form of this soul is not comprised of the elements such that it will decompose into them. So that would be like, for example, the Stoics held that the nefesh, they did hold by a nefesh, but they held that the nefesh was material. Yeah.
So, like a brain.
They held that it was made out of fire, or the element of fire. So not an organ necessarily, but yeah. And this is another thing that Adler talks about, is the two radical views about the relationship between the body and the soul are dualism and monism. Dualism being that the soul is like in the body and they're completely separate, which Plato and Descartes apparently were the two big advocates of dualistic views. And then monism is the idea, that one I can't articulate as well, so I won't. All right. And it's not from the power of the neshama such that it would, and again, this is so bothersome that he has not yet introduced the term neshama, and he's talking about it. He says, it's not mikoch neshama, as if we already know what this is, to the extent that it needs the neshama like the neshama needs the guf. Elam es Hashem min hashamayim. Rather, it's from Hashem min hashamayim. Lefikach. Oh, and by the way, side point here also, I went through a period once where I was very bothered by the fact that we say during the Aseres Yemei Tshuva and in the Avim Pesach Shari Shemaim L'Tfilasenu, and I was bothered by it because I'm not aware, and maybe I just don't know the source, but I'm not aware of anywhere in Tanakh where Shemaim means anything other than the sky. But people clearly use it as like the realm of God, So my theory is that is that the use of Shemaim as like God's realm is like rabbinic usage. And here the Rambam is clearly using it rabbinically. He's not saying it comes from the firmament.
Right.
Like when he defined Shemaim before, that the Shemaim is like the Galgal, he does not hold that it comes from the Galgal. because that's just everything he said up until then denies that. So it sounds like he's saying it comes from like the realm of the immaterial. Lafika Kishi part, yeah.
Why is it bothering that we said in the film? Okay?
We don't want God to open the sky
Well, why
to
did you
accept
say
our
it's for
tefillah.
benefit usage?
What?
Why did you just say it's for benefit usage?
That's what led me to that theory.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, meaning I like it struck me one day when we were saying it. Like, have I ever seen a single pasuk where it means anything other than sky, and then it's a ridiculous tefillah, you know? So then that led me to think, well, it must be that there's rabbinic usage. Yeah.
Yeah, rain on our feels.
Yeah. Lefikach kushipart hagolem shu mechubar min hayisodos v'tovat hanashama. Therefore, when the body decomposes, which is comprised of the elements, and the neshama dies, is lost, because it is only found in the body and needs the body in all of its actions, then that surah will not be cut off. Now that's a little allusion to kares here, because he holds that kares does cut off the surah, right? Because it doesn't need the neshama in its actions. Rather, it knows and apprehends the ideas that are separate from form, from material. And he knows, it knows the creator of everything and lasts forever and ever. The dust will return to the earth like it was, and the spirit will return to the God who gave it. Yeah. Yeah, there was another thing I learned from Adler. There was a scientist who claimed to have found not only the existence of the soul, but the weight of the soul, because he had a thing where he had a study that showed that when a person dies, their body instantaneously becomes, I forgot what the weight was, a certain amount lighter. But unfortunately, he could never replicate the experiment. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I have something that I was thinking about, which is, given that the word for the elements is yesodos.
Yeah.
I was thinking about yesodos, the elements. Like maybe it's like the material, I don't know how he's using yesod. Like maybe I don't know how he's using yesod in that, but maybe it's the root of both the physical and the non-physical.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my assumption is that the word yesod for element is borrowed from the word yesod for foundation, because it's the foundations of material things, not the other way around. Because I think that, again, this is total armchair etymology, as Rapesa calls it. But I think foundations are a more primary concept that language would have come up with first before the theory of the elements. You know, I don't know though. Yeah. Okay, so I feel like that read through was much better than on Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay. Being awake helps. Also spending all Shabbos reading about. I didn't only read the Intellect. I read I read all of the stuff, the history of the soul, the brief history of the soul, which was also very, very confusing and way over my head. But yeah. Okay. Good. So yeah. So this is an important Rambam for many reasons, because when he talks about, first of all, this is what we are. This is identifying what we are. But I feel like now that this is the clearest I've ever had this in my mind, when we encounter the term nefesh, and it does not mean the non-soul things, we really should look back at this and try to see it as an expression of this idea, as opposed to like whatever other idea of nefesh we have. Like, I think my idea of nefesh was more of a vague, like the part of you that thinks. And I feel like maybe if he's giving us such a precise definition here, that it would be fruitful to like look at instances of nefesh through the lens of this Rambam.
Right.
How would you phrase it succinctly?
Nefesh kol basar. No. Yeah. Let me think for 1 second. Yeah. You're witnessing it.
part of a person that can perceive non-physical ideas?
Yes, that's definitely true. But I'm trying to encapsulate that the new note here of the hadas ha'yisera ha'matzuya b'nafsho shel adam hi tzuras ha'adam hashalom b'dato. I want to try to like incorporate that into the, like you're saying you're saying surah hayodas u'masegas adeo she'en lahem golem ad sheyid melahem, which is good. I want to try to incorporate a succinct definition that incorporates hadas ha'yisera ha'matzuya b'nafsho shel adam hi tzuras ha'adam hashalom b'dato, because that's for me the new insight. What?
Where was that?
That's in Kass 1.
I mean, at that point, it's just that that's the essence of man, and that.
Yeah, but he's stating something here that is the fact that he led with nefesh kol basar hitzuras shnas lo akel, and then in the same halacha, the same sentence, goes on to say hadas ha'yisera ha'matzuya b'nafsho shel adam hitzuras ha'adam hashalom b'dato. To me, is significant. The animal is just so the plant has no nefesh. It just has a tsura, which is weird, right?
Oh, okay. I see.
The animal's nefesh is its tsura, and I think it's clear from what he says in Kass 2 that the difference is, the reason why we call that a nefesh is that that's what animates the thing and gives it motion and activities, which in Aristotle world, then the plants don't have. Other book I was reading on Shabbos, Overstory, which is about how plants communicate to each other, and that's real. But Aristotle didn't know about that. So animals have one thing. Their tsura is a nefesh, which has activities, and then das in man's nefesh is the tsura of man's nefesh. And it's the tsura of the man is perfected in his knowledge. Man's nefesh has a tsura. Animals' bodies have a tsura. Man's body has a tsura, but man's animal tsura has a tsura, which is the tsura of the adam hashalom b'dato.
Which.
Oh, we're saying it was essence.
Yeah, there you go. Well, the thing, the nefesh, our nefesh, which has a tsura, that nefesh is that the tsura of the animal?
Yes.
So there's just another thing.
Yeah.
On top of it.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Huh.
Hierarchically on top. Yeah.
Is it essence? Is that a good?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that he doesn't use that term. He uses that term in, he uses that definition in the more nevuchim, that which makes the thing what it is. Here he's choosing not to use those terms. He's using surah, you know? I want to read something here also. Let me stop sharing the screen for 1 second. I don't know if this is going to help or hurt. And I say that every time I read this passage. Okay, so there's, I use this in my,
I just want to make sure of the term. Zero is form, right?
yeah.
I'm just it's like I'm just confused how something that is the tsura for like the animals is also like wouldn't that mean there's only one nefesh? Like, well, no, never mind. I don't know.
It's not a problem. The first step is realize it's not a problem for something to have multiple forms on different levels of hierarchy.
Right.
Yeah, the thing about that I'd like to say is that the nefesh of animals, like that tsura, is life. And then humans have life, but there's a more essential tsura, which is the abilities of whatever this paragraph. Yeah. And so humans have life, but they also have this additional element.
So the only reason I don't like that is that blurs the distinction between the animal nefesh and the neshama. Because the neshama is somehow connected to life. And that might be the neshama. That's the other thing I'm not sure about. Breath.
Yeah. Is what?
Breath.
Correct.
is the neshama. I like the phenomenon of being alive. Because when you said life, you meant the thing that makes you do your living things, your activities.
But plants have that also.
Plants have the thing that makes you grow, but not the thing that makes you animate.
Right.
Yeah. Let me read this one page.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, again, in Aristotle's world, this is, we read this in the Angels in Us, right? Is the plants have growth, but not locomotion. Animals have locomotion, and humans have locomotion and rationality and growth. Yeah. Let me read this thing. This is from a book by Leon Kass called The Hungry Soul, which is explaining the reality. And Leon Kass is a philosopher and bioethicist who maintains in this book that the ideas of form and matter are not just outdated Aristotelian concepts, but are useful ways of thinking about the world that are still true. And this is a guy who's a biologist, so like he knows his stuff in contemporary biology. But so the book though is about trying to illustrate how the human process of eating illustrates all of the ideas about matter and form. So this is I did this for my EOF class. It's a one-page excerpt where he first introduces the concept of matter and form, and just hearing the way he talks about it might help us to think about it the way the Rambam was doing it, and might resolve the problem of something having the form of the form. Okay, so he says, and this is not the easiest English. So if you need me to repeat something, let me know. Every tangible object or being, whether of natural origin or made by human beings, both is something and is made out of something. Provisionally, let us call the latter its material, that's the made out of something, and the former its form. Form and material are, in the first instance, relative and correlative terms. Form is the something made of certain materials. Materials are, as materials of and for the thing as formed. Meaning, that's like the Rambam said, you never see a form without material and material without form. It's like it's analogous to the fact that you cannot define part without whole and whole without part. They're relative and correlative terms. They're relative to each other, but they only can be defined in relation to each other. In fact, to be material means to be potential, to be able to receive a certain form or forms, to be capable of being worked on by some process or operation that would transform it, that is, form it into something whose material it then becomes. So that's like the mashal of the clay, that clay is material, and to be material means to be formable. Once you make the clay into a statue and you fire it, it is no longer material because it can't be made into something, right? So this part is going to be the thing. Oh, not yet. Wood is by itself just wood. Marble is marble. Cholesterol is cholesterol. But marble becomes also material for Michelangelo only because and when its capacity to be the marble David or Moses is realized through the workings of the sculptor's hand. And cholesterol becomes material for a cholesterol requiring organism when its capacity to interact intimately with other membrane materials is realized as it is incorporated by the organism as a component of its living cell membrane. See, that's why you need someone who's contemporary to talk about Aristotle. Yeah. Without ceasing altogether to be or to manifest properties of marble or cholesterol, these things are transformed and altered by the subordination to the activity of information. The materials, through following their own nature, are at the same time constrained by their new arrangements, which constitute nature of a higher order. So I don't know if he's going to give this example, but let's say like the table that's made out of wood and metal, it has the properties of wood and metal, but those properties are being constrained by a higher organization, which is in the form of a table. Okay, now this part, not yet. Okay, yes, this part is might address this is why I wanted to read this, is the thing about the man has a chavurah goof, and which is a nefesh, and then that nefesh has a chavurah, which is the chavurah of the Adam Hashalom B'dato. So he says, form and material are interdependent, not only in definition, but also usually in fact. Though distinct as ideas and separable in speech, they are, especially in living things, grown together in the enmattered form, or the informed matter that is the given thing. The dog and its flesh, the oak and its roots, no less than the desk as its wood, are as inseparable, related, and mutually interdependent as the concave and the convex. Okay, this is the sentence. The relativity and interdependence of material and form persist also at multiple levels of organization. The oak wood that is material for the table itself.
So can you read the first half of the sentence again?
The relativity and interdependence of material and form persist also at multiple levels of organization. Now here's the key point. The oak wood that is material for the table itself is a special form, say, of xylem and phloem, which are in turn special formations of cells, which are special formations of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, and so on.
Mhm.
At the lowest level, some least or ultimate material would be reached, if any such there be, that could not be analyzed further into its form and material, and whose part, if it had parts, would be homogeneous with the whole. Such an ultimate material would be more than material relative to some other form. It would be matter. So that's the thing, is that the wood is a form in relation to the xylem and phloem, which I don't know what that is, by the way, but the xylem and phloem are forms in relation to the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, etc. So too in man, the surah of the goof, that surah is a surah in relation to the stuff that makes up his body.
Mhm.
But the surah of the Adam Hashalom Badato is the surah of that animal, that animal nefesh. It's the higher organizing principle of that animal nefesh.
Wait, sorry, the Adam Hashalim.
Yeah, the surah of the Adam Hashalim. The Dasai Sarah that is in the surah of the nefesh is the surah of the Adam Hashalim Badato.
And that organizes the nefesh.
That organizes the animalistic nefesh,
Uh-huh.
which itself organizes the body.
Wow.
One more paragraph, okay, which I think will also help. If material, so this is where he tries to define what form is.
Oh man, can't believe we got there.
Yeah. If material is material relative to a form, then what is a form? Form is often connected with shape and figure, but when we think of form with regard to living beings, we mean more than shape or figure and more than an aggregate of corporeal parts. A pile of rocks has shape, but not form. It is a heap, not a whole. Okay, it's a weird example to use. Now here's where he defines it. And I have this, I bolded this. So bold it in your mind, not you. Form is what makes a being a unity and a whole in the world and through time. Form is that order or ordering that makes a one of the many components, giving it an integrity that the components by themselves do not have. I'll read those two sentences again. Form is what makes a being a unity and a whole in the world and through time. Form is that order or ordering that makes a one of the many components, giving it an integrity the components by themselves do not have. It is, I confess, extremely difficult to say just what this unifier is, if it is a distinct what. It cannot be outside the outside surface or skin, although the boundary defines the limit of the organism against everything it is not. It does not define what it is.
Uh-huh.
Right? So a dog, it's interesting, a living dog is better than a dead lion. That's Pasuk Mikhaelis, but that's not what he's going to say. A living dog has a boundary, and that boundary doesn't define it, but it is defining the limits of that organism. And the proof of it is when it dies, then it disintegrates and the boundary is no longer there. So it's the boundary of the dog is like a sign of its form or symptom of its form or manifestation of its form, but it's not what the form is.
Mm-hmm. Let's say like a circle or like a triangle. That would be like the outside of it.
Yeah,
Like,
but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, a few more sentences. The boundary is not the cause of you. Oh, this is what I just said. That's where I got it from then. The boundary is not the cause of unity, but rather one of its manifestations. We begin to suspect that form is not primarily something visible or tangible. In short, that there is, in this sense, some immaterial thing that unites and informs the absolutely corporealized organism, but what it is we cannot define. Yet we may continue to discern its meaning and its work. So form as an organizing principle and a unifier is, I think, a very useful way to talk about form. So in the animal, in the golden retriever, the form of dog is that which organizes and unifies that particular dog. And when it dies and it decomposes, that form has departed. It's no longer unifying that thing. Okay? So in man, there is a tzura that unifies all the corporeal elements of man. That tzura is his animal nefesh. So you have this animalistic nefesh that eats and drinks and thinks and does all this other stuff. But then there's a form of that, which is man's soul, which is the tzura of man who's perfected in his knowledge. That's what organizes his animal self. And And the special property of that surah is that it knows things that are separate from, it knows other forms that are separate from material.
Forms that are separate from material.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what we mean when we say man is a rational animal,
Mhm.
right? Is that he is an animal, but rationality is governing it and organizing it. And rationality is its ability to think and to specifically think and seek abstract knowledge, abstract knowledge.
Like forms, right?
Forms.
that don't have to do with
Yeah.
matter. Okay.
Yeah. And this will be very relevant to the tefillah share tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the topic?
Is continuing our exploration of Atah Kadosh.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, ooh,
Yeah. Lot. It's a lot.
yeah. So do the surahs that are like the surah of the bottle doesn't exist like it doesn't exist somewhere else outside the bottle? And like
So
is
that
it something other than the bottle?
Yeah, I mean, that's what gets into your original question about what do we mean when we say that it exists or that it's real. And that gets into the machlokes between Plato and Aristotle about what is the mode of existence of forms, which the Rambam does. Rambam, I think, is an Aristotelian in that regard, because he's saying that it exists in the form exists in the thing, in the material thing, but the mind of man separates it. It's not like existing in some other realm. The tsuros that don't have bodies, like the angels, those do exist in another realm. What that is, I also don't know.
So
Yeah.
everyone agrees there are tsuros that exist not in the bottles, or not, you know.
Yeah,
not in
yeah,
the things.
yeah. The other difficulty, by the way, with the bottle example is
Yeah.
that man-made objects and natural objects are different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because man-made objects, see, because in this way of thinking about things, the tsuros of the natural world are real and they exist in the mind of God, in the mind of the active intellect, or whatever, whatever you say. Whereas the forms that, like, when you come up with a design for a new invention or a building or whatever, that just exists in your mind.
Uh-huh.
You came up with a form, so it's of a different nature than divine craft.
Right. But when it becomes, when you make it, isn't that then, doesn't the active intellect have to give it form?
No, I don't think when you make your particular objects, I don't think so. I think the active intellect
That comes from
is only talking about is only dealing with natural forms. Yeah.
What about like an airplane?
What about what?
Like airplane. Is there no form of airplane?
I think that's just an artificial form, a human design.
right. Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of like the
Yeah, but see, but you're confused because of the questions that are outside the scope
Yeah.
of the Rambam,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Rambam, I think, is
The
clear.
Rambam
Yeah,
is-
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are obviously a lot of questions here,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah, no, but the Rambam is clear.
Yeah. Okay.
just like in terms of like the proof of form, like I said, like the you know that you can have like the same word in different languages that corresponds to.
That's not a proof of form, just to be clear. That's a proof that that the abstractions or that the ideas that are perceived by the human mind are immaterial.
Uh-huh. Well, as opposed to, what would be a proof of form?
I don't think you can prove form.
What do you mean? Okay, me.
I don't think you could prove form in any more of a way that you could prove that essence and accident exist.
Uh-huh.
Well, no. I mean, you can deny that they exist, but it's a way that the mind thinks of things. You know,
Okay. You can't
form
prove it, right?
is all things have form and matter. I think that's a self-evident, or that's like built into the way that we think of things.
That things are organized.
Right. Once you start talking about the properties of forms and how they exist and how that stuff you do need to prove.
Right.
But the notion of form and matter, I think, is just built into the human mind the same way essence and accident are.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, I think that's enough work for today, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think now that we've gotten this far, I think on Wednesday it'd be a good idea to do just the last couple halachos in the Mishnah in chapter 4, which we've read already, but we didn't think about and analyze. And then if anyone's interested in doing the Adler thing, we could do that some other time. The ideas will still be there. They're eternal after all. Okay, all right, see ya.